So we just read the Grimm brothers story, The White Snake. You want to give us a summary and then we'll talk about it?
Mhm. And there's a king who's known to be very wise, and he has all of his meals brought to him, except there's like one meal that must be covered, and the servants can't look at what it is, so they don't know what that last meal he eats is supposed to be. So one of the servants that brings it to him becomes consumed with curiosity. So on the day he's to give that meal to the king, he instead takes it to his room to see what it is. And after locking the door, um he uncovers the dish and it's a white snake. He can't help himself and he cuts a little piece of the snake, and as soon as he touches it with his tongue, he starts hearing voices of animals. So I think he hears like some sparrows at first. Um,
Mhm.
and they're talking about, I forgot what they're talking about, but
They're
I think
telling one
just,
another all kinds of things which they had
yeah,
seen in the fields and woods.
yeah. Um, so yeah, he ends up taking the rest to the king, and one day the queen loses her ring, and because this servant is allowed free access everywhere, the king suspects that he stole the ring, and he tells the servant that if he doesn't find the ring, he will be put to death. Um,
Yeah, if he doesn't find who
so
did steal it.
yeah, yeah. So he tries to find who stole it, and he goes to a nearby pond, and there's some geese talking, and hears one of the geese saying that her stomach is full, and that it's because she accidentally ate the ring under the queen's window. So after hearing that, he immediately grabs the goose and he takes her to the kitchen and tells the chef to kill her, and because she's like a very fat goose, and yeah, she's good enough now to eat. So
I think they're ducks, but yeah, anyway.
okay, so yeah, he kills the duck or goose and cuts off her head, and they immediately find the ring. So he takes the ring back to the king, and the king, I think is apologetic and asks him like what he wants. Um, and he requests to be allowed to travel and see the world.
Yeah,
So
and a horse and money.
mhm. So the king grants those requests, and he makes his way. So at first, as he's traveling, he finds some fish out of the water, and the fish are lamenting that they're going to die in the water. So he takes pity on them and returns them back to the pond. And the fish thank him and tell him that he will be repaid for saving their life. And he keeps going on his journey, and then he finds, I think, an ant, some
Well, they're just,
ants.
yeah, going on the trail, and then,
Yeah.
yeah, he hears the ant king
Mhm.
complaining
Yeah.
about
So,
his clumsy beasts always
mhm.
treading on us.
Yeah. So the ant king complains, and after hearing the complaint, he decides to take his horse on an alternate path. So the ant king thanks him and tells him that he'll be repaid for his help. And further along the way, the servant encounters some ravens kicking out some three chicks from the nest. And the ravens are saying that they need to be on their own now and that they can't feed them. And then the chicks are scared and lamenting that they're going to die from starvation.
Yeah, they
So
can't fly yet.
the servant decides to kill his horse and give it to the chicks to eat. And the chicks thank him for saving their life, and they tell him that he will be repaid. So the servant keeps traveling and I think he stops at I don't know if it's the same kingdom as or a different kingdom, but
He goes by like
um
three kingdoms, I think, and maybe
yeah,
at the third one or after three.
yeah. And at the kingdom he's at now, uh there's a beautiful princess and the king there is trying to marry her off, but the catch is that all the young suitors have to do like impossible tasks to gain her hand, and they've all died trying. Um, but when the servant sees her, he falls in love with her beauty and he goes to the king and tells him that he wants her hand in marriage. And the king, um, he decides that the first task will be at sea. So the servant goes to the sea, and the king has like a ring tossed into the ocean. And he tells the servant that if he can't catch the ring, that he'll be thrown back into the water as many times as it takes until he dies.
That's right. And this isn't the first task. This is the only task at this point.
Mhm. Yeah, so the villagers gather at this sea and they grieve and they're expecting him to die. So they leave. And the fish hear about the challenge, so they one of the fish that he rescued, well, all three of them, they come and they bring him a mussel with the ring in it, and they tell him that, they're repaying him for his help. So the servant takes the ring back to the king, and the princess, she sees that he's not her equal in status, so her pride leads her to demand a second task. And the second task is she takes like these 10 sacks of millet and dumps them out into a garden. And if he can't collect all the millet grain by grain by sunrise, he'll die. Um, so the servant is sitting there outside in the garden and he's expecting to die. But once it's almost sunrise, he finds that the 10 sacks of millet are all filled up perfectly. And it was the ant king that had gathered thousands of ants to help collect the millet. And so he takes the millet back to the princess and
Well, she came
the
down into the garden
yeah. And then the princess still can't doesn't want to marry him. And she says that if he finds the golden apple, he will be able to marry her.
from the tree
So,
of life.
mhm,
Kind of a big task.
mhm. So he sets about wandering for a long time. And yeah, he's not any closer to finding the apple. And then one day the three ravens that he rescued, they find him resting under a tree, and they perch on his knees and wake him up, and they drop the apple on him. Um, and they tell him that they had flown across the ocean to the end of the world to find the apple for him because he had saved them. So he takes the apple back to the princess, and um, she has nothing more to demand of him for challenges. And they split the apple in half and eat it, and they live happily ever after.
And after they ate it together, then her heart became full of love for him. Yeah. Yeah, very good summary, man. You remembered like so many little details, like the birds, the ravens perched on his knee, that it was millet seeds, etc. Yeah. So, what did you notice about this story? What did you think about it?
Mhm. Yeah, it sounded very similar to other stories we read. I just don't remember the titles right
Mm,
away.
mm.
But yeah, I was just remembering noticing the rule of threes. Like as often,
Oh,
there's
like,
always seems to be like three challenges
mm.
in a lot of these stories.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Um, and yeah, it seems like the white snake, even though it's called the white snake, it was only briefly in the story from the beginning, but it didn't really have much to do with the rest of the story.
Yeah, that's funny. But that sets
Yeah.
everything in motion. That's what
Hmm.
gets the hero to go on the hero's journey. It gives him the special power. It
Yeah.
gives him a special power that he can go on.
Mhm.
It's funny, I thought it might be nefarious in some way, but I guess it could have led to his death, but it ended up leading to him, risking death multiple times and then ultimately to glory. And he's able to overcome the threat of death because he has saved so many people along the way, which is kind of like being a good king, which is where he got the snake in the first place.
Hmm.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, he was forbidden. He was supposed to not look at the snake, but he did. Curiosity
Hmm.
killed the cat, but
Yeah.
and it could have killed him. It almost killed him because
Mhm.
it seemed like maybe like coincidentally the queen lost her ring after that and he was the one that was suspected. So it's like when he was following all the rules, he was the trusted servant and he was given a comfortable life, in the palace, which of course
Mhm.
represents, a place where all needs are met, where everyone lives in comfort, but there is
Mhm.
no adventure or growth,
Mhm.
or, what glory or whatever you might.
Yeah. Yeah, I sort of wonder if the king in that instance is kind of like God in a way, because maybe he kind of knew that he had eaten of the snake, just like in the Bible when God like immediately knows when Eve bit the apple, the tree of
Oh, yeah.
knowledge, and that's when like all the challenges started for the servant, like you said, that with
Yeah,
him
right.
being suspected of losing the ring.
Yeah, that's
Um,
funny. Yeah, that
yeah.
seems like a very solid parallel. I wonder why it's a white snake. Yeah, and the king himself is kind of a mysterious, kind of omnipotent, kind of powerful figure. I think they describe that king like he kind of knows everything that's going on. Uh, Nothing was hidden from him, and it seemed as if news of the most secret things was brought to him through the air. He is this like godlike figure. Yeah. So yeah, the who ended up being the king or who ended up being the prince was he was threatened with death something like four times in this story, like the first time when he was a servant and then the three times when the proud princess won't accept him. I wonder why they have to be threatened with death, like, you know is it like they have to risk everything? They have to risk everything to be worthy of the princess's hand. And I wonder what's with these stories anyway, with like commoners kind of being able to marry princesses, like if there's historical precedent for that, or is this like total fantasy? I mean, aren't most like monarchs, don't they marry like within their class and it's political kind of marriages and everything?
Yeah, like I feel like at the time that was mostly the case.
Maybe
Um,
these kind of originate in the late Middle Ages when
mm,
like peasants after the bubonic plagues and stuff, like there was a big shortage of workers and they started to move around and get higher wages, and maybe it's like at that time they can dream, and that's the rise of the bourgeoisie and everything, and they
mm,
started gaining buying into noble families and everything. Maybe this story is kind of linked to that in some way.
mm,
But it's interesting that yeah, he's always able. So after he eats the snake, he's able to kind of he ascends in society, but through the help of the lowly, fish in the sea, getting a mussel. Um, he even goes lower in that he kills the horse. But then the ravens are on the ground,
Mm.
and the ants crawling in the sand, beneath his feet. It's like everything below is helping him to get above.
Mm.
And the thing above, yeah, is quite haughty. It does take a lot of work to really get her. And only when she at the end consumes like he did does she change.
Mm.
And yeah, I was commenting on you. That's quite a journey, quite a request she made of him, like to go to the ends of the freaking earth and get the tree of life, get the apple from the tree of life, like, you know. And there's no way like he would have been able to do that. But someone who's able to do that, pretty much like, I don't know what, the best man on earth or something at this point.
Mm.
And the tree of life, isn't that in the Garden of Eden? Isn't that what like gives eternal life? Isn't that one of the two trees? There's a tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life, right? And aren't those what make you like God? And that's why it's forbidden. And after they eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and everybody blames everybody else. That's when they're kicked out, right?
Yeah, and I think like that also brought death to the world or something too. I'm not so sure,
Yeah, I think
but uh,
when they were living in the Garden of Eden, they were gonna
yeah,
just live forever, right?
yeah, yeah. But maybe that is kind of linked to why he's like threatened with death multiple times after having a snake, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of takes like Knight's Quest kind of adventure story combined
Hmm.
with like religious kinds of things. Yeah, but yeah, boy moves up in the world. Yeah, with the help of his friends. I was kind of surprised they killed the duck. Like it's like he hears the language of animals and then like he goes outside in despair and then they kill the duck to get the golden ring.
Yeah, and then he kills the horse.
Yeah, kills a horse. But I can only, yeah, killing the horses may be going down. But he kills a horse to feed three ravens, you
Yeah.
know? And also that is an instance of sacrifice where like things become more difficult for him after that.
Mm.
Maybe it's also like he's severing his ties to the palace in which he was a servant.
Mm.
And
Oh yeah.
now he's really like just out in the world, sort of communing with nature and at at the I don't know. Yeah, at living by his wits,
Mm.
living by his morals, which ultimately save him, in
Mm.
the friendships he's made from being good and from helping others, from having compassion
Mm.
and having respect. He has compassion from the fishes in the reeds. He has respect for the ant king, and then he has, compassion for the ravens.
Mm.
And are ravens associated sort of with death or something? Or I'm just thinking of the Edgar Allan Poe
Mm.
poem. But maybe all the animals that he sort of helps aren't necessarily they aren't like ones that would obviously help you, so
Yeah.
obviously be of advantage to you. So if you can think of the analog as some kind of analog in life, it's like being good to those whom you think will help you is not exactly like moral virtue.
Mm.
But being good to those who are least, that seems like particularly Christian,
mm,
and that seems more virtuous.
mm.
It's not it's obviously not done out of pure calculation, especially like ants and fishes. Yeah, and ravens too, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's able to I mean, the killing of the horse is like a sacrifice. It's what he got from the king. Typically, I think in many of the sacrificial offerings are supposed to be of your best thing. So, I mean, that is his best thing. It's the thing he's depending on. It's the only possession he has besides money,
Mm,
presumably. It's from the king. Yeah, it's very valuable.
mm,
You may know that the whole story of uh, Minos and the Minotaur, comes from when he was given, I think, a white bull from the sea. Anyway, he's given like this one wondrous animal by Poseidon, and he's supposed to sacrifice it. But so he's given something, he's supposed to sacrifice it, but he's given something from the god, and it's supposed to sacrifice it. But then he ends up, keeping it for himself and sacrificing like a bull of its likeness, you know, and and
mm,
that don't work, you know. So yeah, but this young man does everything right. He does, except for eat of the snake. That's an interesting thing. He's
yeah.
not really supposed to do that, right? But the story doesn't say like the king forbade it or the book of, you know, the Bible forbade it or something like that. And it does kind of, as you mentioned in your good summary, that like he was like kind of he was kind of overwhelmed by the desire and curiosity, which sounds a little bit like Eve in the garden again.
Mm,
When he had carefully locked the door, so he is, yeah, conscientious. He lifted up the cover and saw a white snake lying on the dish. I also noticed it didn't say it was like half eaten or something like that. I mean, presumably the
yeah.
king was eating this every night anyway. But when he saw it, he could not deny himself the pleasure of tasting it. So he cut off a little bit and put it into his mouth. No sooner had it touched his tongue than he heard a strange whispering of little voices outside his window. But yeah, yeah, besides that, but maybe that's fate or something. It's not like it says that he was forbidden from doing that, but it seemed like it was
Mm,
kind of against the rules, is some kind of transgression.
mm,
But I don't know. But maybe that's like, I don't know, just a sign of like spirit or curiosity or something special about this kid, maybe, as opposed to like he's just kind of like going about his day, doing his duties, collecting his paycheck, so to speak.
mm,
Like he has something more that destines him for a life outside the palace. He's not satisfied, maybe. It's a little like the story of the Buddha where, well, there's a little bit of difference there, but Buddha's taken outside of the palace and he's suddenly shocked into not being satisfied with the, thousand pleasures of the palace that his father had set up to try to keep him from ever becoming like a spiritual leader.
mm,
Yeah. 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 I really like this story. Anything about the queen losing the ring? Any
mm.
significance of that? I mean, obviously there's a ring later on. This is a ring that sets him on his quest. And later on there's another ring that kind of like foreshadows his marriage with the proud princess who eventually gives in.
Yeah, like I don't know much. Yeah, I don't think, yeah, I think it's kind of what you said, just kind of symbolic of all that. Um, and yeah, because then presumably the princess will be as like a future queen herself. So
All
like
right.
it's kind
Yeah,
of
obviously.
lost and then kind of found again like,
There's
with
one
her.
queen that
Yeah.
lost her ring. He got it back from a water animal. Another princess, they throw her ring in. He gets it back. He eventually marries her, and she becomes a. They eventually become the king and queen, presumably. Yeah, I like how. Yeah, I'd like to know more about that, about how the people sort of take like official stories and sort of like take elements and reconstitute things, and it's interesting, this creativity. It doesn't say they lived forever. I mean, the tree of life, they just lived to an undisturbed happiness to a great age. So, I mean, maybe it's just sort of like that's the end of this veil of tears, or this difficult, toil that he has had to undergo,
Mm.
you know. This is now his reward, his golden years with the golden apple. Any idea if that golden apple might be linked to the apple? It might be a kind of like conflation of the apple from the garden, or the fruit from the Garden of Eden, and the I think it's the apple of the Hesperides. The what there was like a contest between uh like three goddesses were in ancient Greece, were trying to figure out who was the most beautiful, and like Paris was tasked with telling that, with deciding, and that had something to do with like starting the Trojan War later on.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know, but I mean, certainly in these stories there's like they've various people have heard various things. I'd
Mhm.
like to know more about the kind of how these form, but that's more like scholarly kind of thing. But that's interesting to me. But yeah, there's the traditions of the Bible, but also the Greek and Roman mythology. Those would be two sort of sets of sources that may be mixed together, sometimes in these stories. I yeah, I lament in some way that we don't have as many of these stories nowadays, probably, and it's probably been happening for a long time. But it's just, we have so much media now, and, on screens and everything. People just probably consume those more than like tell these stories. But I don't know. I feel like it would be, if we have a cultural rejuvenation, it would partially be storytelling would be an element of that, you know. I just think, yeah, active kinds of communication are very important for like the liveliness of a people, of a family, of a culture.
Yeah.
I mean, the word culture itself means something that is cultivated, something that is energy is put into it, and creativity, and things come up spontaneously.
Hmm.
It's not something that is simply received and repeated robotically. Yeah. Well, do you have any last thoughts on this? White snake, threat of death, golden rings, help from below, the little creatures of the sea and the sand and the trees, and finally, commotion in the city. And we didn't mention many dead would-be suitors, or many dead former suitors, would-be princes, before this intrepid and goodly youth come along. And then finally a haughty princess who is, whose resistance is finally able to be overcome after you know, journey to the across the the great ocean with all its serpents to the end of the earth, an island out there, and then brought, the golden apple of from the tree of life is brought back. And finally she says, I do. And consummation, consuming and consummation. But yeah, you have any last thoughts about this one?
Not really so far.
Okay. Yeah, that was a good one though. Enjoyed that. Still the image of the white snake is a little disturbing to me. I kind of imagine it
Yeah.
like a little translucent little okay. And every night it's brought back. There's like an eternalness to it. Like the king after he eats his dishes, they're brought this covered dish was brought to him every night. And he always ate it alone. Trusted servant. Okay. Well, until next time.
Mm.
Sounds